Imagine a world where the earth is thriving, the air is warm, and giant beasts roam the land. But then, in the blink of an eye, everything changes. Temperatures drop by nearly 10 degrees Celsius. The climate turns hostile, and the once fertile lands become barren. This wasn't a gradual shift. This was the Younger Dryas, a cataclysmic event that reshaped life on Earth, triggering the extinction of megafauna, forcing human societies to the brink, and plunging the planet back into a sudden ice age. But here's the most compelling question. What if this wasn't the end, but rather the start of a new chapter? In the aftermath of this global disaster, what if humanity didn't simply survive, but used the lessons of the past to rebuild something even greater? Sumer, the first known civilization, suddenly emerged with writing, agriculture, and monumental cities as if from nowhere. Was it born from nothing, or was it the rebirth of knowledge lost to the cataclysm? And what if this cataclysm was more than just a natural event? What if ancient civilizations had thrived before, only to be erased by the Younger Dryas, leaving behind echoes in myths, flood stories, and forgotten technologies? In the next few hours, we will dive into this mystery. What happened to the knowledge of ancient peoples? Where did Sumer's innovations come from? And could this all be the story of human resilience? Rebuilding not just from the ruins, but from lost wisdom? I'm curious. Where are you tuning in from, and what time is it there? Feel free to share in the comments. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Get cozy. It's time to let your mind wander, whether you're winding down for sleep or simply enjoying the calm. It's truly great having you here. Let's dive in. The Younger Dryas began around 12,800 years ago, a time when the Earth had been warming steadily, moving out of the last ice age. But instead of continuing its trend toward a more temperate climate, the planet was thrown into a rapid cooling phase. In just a matter of decades, temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The suddenness of this climate shift was catastrophic. Glaciers that had been retreating began to surge again, expanding across the landscape. The evidence for this dramatic cooling comes from ice core data, particularly the GRIP and GISP2 cores taken from Greenland. These cores contain layers of ice that have built up over thousands of years, trapping air bubbles, pollen, and other materials. By analyzing these cores, scientists have been able to track the rapid temperature fluctuations during the Younger Dryas. The data is startling. A sharp decline in temperature is visible, with evidence of extreme cooling stretching over a few decades. It is clear from this data that the Earth was not just undergoing a natural cycle, but something far more disruptive. This was not gradual. It was abrupt, severe, and global. But the cooling wasn't confined to just the northern regions. The Younger Dryas triggered widespread changes to ecosystems and weather patterns around the world. The cooling affected the oceans, causing the thermaline circulation, often referred to as the global conveyor belt, to slow down, which disrupted the flow of warm water into the northern latitudes. As a result, global weather systems were thrown into chaos, affecting everything from rainfall patterns to ocean currents. Scientists have long debated what caused this sudden shift in climate. The most widely accepted explanation is the disruption of the North Atlantic thermaline circulation. This circulation is a process that brings warm water from the tropics to the northern parts of the planet, moderating temperatures and keeping northern regions warmer. When the Laurentide ice sheet, the massive ice sheet that once covered much of North America, began to melt rapidly, large amounts of fresh water flooded into the North Atlantic, interrupting this essential circulation. This influx of fresh water likely caused the cooling. But not all scientists agree that this is the only cause. Some theorists propose that a comet or asteroid impact could have triggered the cooling event. The hypothesis, first introduced by Firestone, suggests that a comet fragment or asteroid struck Earth, causing massive wildfires, dust clouds, and a dramatic cooling effect. The evidence for this impact hypothesis includes iridium-rich layers and nanodiamonds found in sediment cores. These materials are often associated with cosmic impacts, leading some researchers to believe that a catastrophic event from space was responsible for the Younger Dryas. A third theory proposes that volcanic activity could have played a role, with massive eruptions spewing ash and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, blocking out sunlight and cooling the planet. Others have pointed to solar variability, suggesting that a solar minimum or reduced solar activity could have contributed to the cooling by reducing the amount of energy reaching the Earth. While these theories differ, what is clear is that the Younger Dryas event was not just a mild shift in temperature. It was a global catastrophe with far-reaching consequences. The disruption it caused to ecosystems, to life, and to early human societies cannot be overstated. Despite the catastrophic effects of the Younger Dryas on the environment, humanity survived. Evidence shows that early humans lived through the cooling period, adapting in creative ways to the rapidly changing world. Human societies in the Near East and Mesopotamia found refuge in areas that were less severely impacted by the cooling event. The Levant and parts of Anatolia became refugia, where early human groups could continue their existence, adapting to new conditions and finding innovative ways to survive. But how did early humans adapt? How did they survive in the face of such a challenging environment? One key to their survival was resource management. Humans in these regions were already beginning to experiment with agriculture, planting and cultivating wild cereals like barley and wheat. In fact, some evidence suggests that the Natufians, a culture that lived in the Levant during this time, were among the first to transition from purely hunter-gatherer lifestyles to more sedentary farming practices. Their ability to store food and adapt to harsh climates may have been crucial to their survival. Archaeological sites like Göbekli Tepe and Cataluyuk provide further clues about how early societies adjusted to the changing environment. Göbekli Tepe, an ancient ceremonial site in southern Turkey, was built around 9600 BCE, shortly after the Younger Dryas. It features monumental stone pillars and intricate carvings, suggesting that these early people had a sophisticated understanding of architecture, astronomy, and social organization. The sheer scale of Göbekli Tepe indicates that these people were not just surviving. They were thriving in the aftermath of the Younger Dryas, building complex social and religious structures that could withstand future challenges. Cataluyuk, another key site, provides evidence of the development of agriculture and early urban planning. This Neolithic settlement, inhabited around 7500 BCE, shows how people adapted to new ways of life after the Younger Dryas. The people of Cataluyuk lived in tightly packed homes, built on top of each other, which may have offered protection against the colder climate. They grew crops and domesticated animals, laying the foundation for the rise of early civilizations. The Younger Dryas shaped human migration, subsistence practices, and cultural memory. The early survivors not only adapted to their environment, they preserved knowledge, passed down traditions, and rebuilt the foundations of civilization. From these survivors, civilization would emerge anew in a way that would forever shape the future of humanity. Flood myths are found in nearly every culture, from the ancient Near East to the Americas, and they all share strikingly similar elements: the wrath of gods, the destruction of mankind, and a lone survivor or a group of survivors who rebuild the world after the floodwaters recede. The Sumerian flood myth is one of the oldest and most significant, recorded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or Ziu-Sudra, also known as Utnapishtim in the Akkadian version, survives a catastrophic flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity. This tale of divine retribution and survival is not just a story of flooding. It is a cultural memory of a past disaster that was passed down through generations, becoming foundational to the Sumerian worldview and influencing later cultures. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest surviving pieces of literature, recounts the story of Utnapishtim, a man chosen by the gods to survive a global flood. The gods, angered by mankind's noise and unrighteousness, decide to destroy humanity. But Utnapishtim, warned by the god Enki, builds a massive boat, saves his family, and preserves the life of every species on earth. After the floodwaters subside, Utnapishtim offers sacrifices, and the gods, realizing the value of humanity, grant him eternal life. In the Sumerian version, this flood myth is central to the broader narrative of human survival after a devastating, almost apocalyptic event. This Sumerian flood myth bears striking similarities to other ancient flood stories. The Atrahasis epic, another Sumerian text, tells a similar tale, with the gods sending a flood to destroy humanity, and a lone survivor, Atrahasis, building a boat to escape the destruction. These myths are not just localized stories, but seem to echo a common cultural memory of a shared catastrophe, a flood that wiped out much of the Earth's inhabitants, and survivors who carried the knowledge of the past into the future. Beyond Sumer, the story of a great flood recurs in the mythologies of other ancient civilizations. In the Bible, the tale of Noah's Ark mirrors the Sumerian flood myth in many respects. Noah, warned by God, builds an ark to save his family and pairs of every animal. After the floodwaters recede, Noah releases a dove to find dry land, and the world begins again. This parallelism between the Noah story and the Sumerian Utnapishtim highlights a cultural link between the Sumerians and the Hebrews, suggesting that these ancient tales could be connected, either through direct influence or through the shared memory of the same event. In Hindu mythology, the story of Manu is another variation of the Great Flood. Manu, warned by the god Vishnu, builds a boat to survive a flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Manu, like Utnapishtim and Noah, survives the catastrophe and becomes the progenitor of a new human race. The Greek myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha also follows the same pattern, where the gods, angry at humanity, send a flood to wipe them out, and only Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive by following the gods' instructions to build a boat. These cross-cultural parallels are not simply coincidental. They point to a common archetype that stretches across time and geography. The presence of these flood myths suggests that cultures throughout history have shared a collective memory of a catastrophic event. Whether the flood was a real geological event, such as the Black Sea deluge hypothesis, or a symbolic narrative passed down through generations, the core of the myth remains the same. A great flood wipes out humanity, and a small group of survivors rebuilds the world. But why have these myths persisted through so many cultures and civilizations? From a psychological perspective, the flood myth is a cultural archetype that embodies both destruction and renewal. The flood represents not just a physical cleansing, but also a spiritual rebirth, a chance for humanity to start anew. It serves as a warning of the dangers of moral decay and the wrath of the gods, but it also carries a message of hope. Even after total destruction, life can begin again. In the psychological sense, these myths may reflect the human psyche's response to cataclysmic trauma. When faced with natural disasters, human societies may have turned to stories that explain such catastrophes, embedding those narratives into their cultural fabric as a way of coping with trauma. Cultural trauma theory suggests that significant events, whether natural disasters, wars, or other calamities, leave a lasting mark on societies, and those events are often encoded in myths and stories that get passed down through generations. The Younger Dryas event, with its abrupt and devastating climatic changes, may have been one such cataclysmic event that shaped the collective memory of ancient societies. As civilizations rebuilt after the trauma of a global disaster, they created myths to explain the flood and their survival, stories that would be shared across cultures and eras. These ancient flood myths are more than just stories. They are encoded memories of real events, whether in the form of a cosmic impact, a global flood, or a climatic catastrophe. They are our ancestors' way of processing collective trauma, remembering the past, and passing on crucial survival knowledge. Through the myths of Utnapishtim, Noah, Manu, and Deucalion, we glimpse a world that existed long before written history, a world that was forever changed by a great catastrophe, and a world that gave birth to the civilizations we know today. As the survivors of the Younger Dryas emerged from the wreckage, these myths became their foundation. Knowledge was passed down, not just through agricultural innovations, but through stories. These stories would shape the first civilizations, from the Sumerians to the Egyptians, and their influence would echo throughout the ages. The myth of the flood wasn't just a tale of survival. It was the seed of civilization itself, the shared memory of a world reborn after catastrophe. After the Younger Dryas, humanity found itself in a world profoundly changed, one where the warmth of the previous eras had been replaced by a harsh, more unpredictable climate. But amidst the cold, the survivors of this cataclysm began the long and arduous journey of rebuilding their societies, with lessons learned from the past and an unyielding determination to adapt to the new world. As the ice sheets receded and the planet began to stabilize, a crucial shift began to take place: the rise of agriculture and urbanization. In the regions of the Near East, particularly in the Fertile Crescent, human societies began to slowly rediscover the techniques necessary to reclaim the land. These were places that had once been lush and fertile, and now, with the warming temperatures and shifting ecosystems, it became evident that humanity could not simply return to the old ways of hunting and gathering. The survivors had to innovate, adapting to their new environment and learning to cultivate the land in a more sustainable, systematic manner. This marked the dawn of Neolithic farming. The Younger Dryas had left its mark. For centuries, societies had relied on nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles, following the herds and collecting wild plants. But this lifestyle became increasingly unsustainable as ecosystems changed. With large swaths of land covered by ice, and the megafauna that once provided food and resources now extinct, human survival depended on a shift toward a more controlled relationship with nature. In the aftermath of this catastrophe, people needed a stable, predictable source of food. The Fertile Crescent, stretching from modern-day Iraq and Syria to parts of Turkey and Iran, offered a solution. This area, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, was one of the few places that remained relatively habitable during the Younger Dryas, and it became the heart of the Neolithic Revolution. It was here that humans began to realize the potential of agriculture, not just as a survival strategy, but as the foundation for civilization. The process was gradual and began with the domestication of plants. Wild grasses like wheat, barley, and rye, which had been harvested in the wild, were now cultivated in fields. This move from wild to domesticated plants was a monumental shift, one that would enable early societies to settle in one place for the first time in human history. The domestication of animals like sheep and goats followed, further securing the agricultural base and providing a steady source of protein, milk, and wool. As these new agricultural practices began to take hold, they weren't perfect, nor were they immediately successful on a large scale. The land had been scarred by the abrupt climate shift, and many early agricultural efforts faced setbacks. But over time, innovations in farming techniques allowed these societies to refine and improve their methods. The introduction of irrigation systems was one of the most significant technological advances. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which had always provided water, were now harnessed to create complex canal systems that allowed crops to be grown year-round. The ancient Sumerians were pioneers in creating such irrigation networks, and these systems were essential for supporting the burgeoning urban populations. Through these innovations, Surplus food became a reality. Surplus food allowed people to settle in one place for longer periods. It freed up labor to focus on non-agricultural pursuits like building, governance, and craftsmanship, laying the groundwork for complex societies. Cities began to emerge from the scattered agricultural villages as people came together in these fertile lands, forming the first urban centers in human history. Irrigation was not just a tool for survival. It was a key element in the rise of urbanization. With the ability to produce a consistent surplus of food, people no longer needed to be constantly moving in search of resources. They could settle in one place, build homes, and create a more organized society. The Sumerians, who lived between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, were masters of irrigation. They developed intricate canals, ditches, and levees to manage the flow of water, allowing crops to be watered even during the dry months. These systems made the region one of the most productive agricultural areas in the ancient world. The surplus of food also had significant social and economic implications. It allowed for the development of specialized labor. As fewer people needed to focus solely on food production, others could take on roles such as craftsmen, traders, priests, and scribes. This division of labor was essential for the development of a complex society. The Sumerians, in particular, were the first to develop writing, which began as a way to keep track of food surpluses, trade goods, and labor. What began as a simple method of record-keeping quickly expanded to include laws, religious texts, and historical records. The development of cities such as Uruk, Ur, and Lachish was the natural next step. With food production stable and surplus available, the focus shifted to urban planning, governance, and monumental architecture. The creation of ziggurats, massive stepped temples dedicated to the gods, became central to the Sumerian way of life. These structures not only served religious purposes, but also acted as social centers, reinforcing the power of the priest-kings who ruled over these emerging cities. These cities became hubs of trade, education, and art, the innovations that began as a response to the Younger Dryas cataclysm. Agriculture, irrigation, writing, and urbanization became the foundation for the first great civilizations in human history. What had once been survivors clinging to life after a devastating global event had, within a few thousand years, transformed into the Sumerians, the creators of the first known civilization. In the aftermath of the Younger Dryas, as the world began to stabilize, human societies found themselves in a unique position. The devastation of the old world had made room for something new, but this was not the first time humanity had faced challenges. Knowledge had been passed down through generations in a mixture of oral traditions, rituals, and practical survival techniques. But as societies transitioned from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled agricultural communities, a more sophisticated way to preserve and expand that knowledge became necessary. This necessity gave rise to one of the most transformative innovations in human history: writing. The invention of writing was a game changer. Initially, writing emerged out of practical necessity. Humans needed a way to keep track of increasingly complex tasks, from trade and inventory to the management of agricultural surpluses. However, over time, it evolved into something far more profound: a tool for preserving culture, governance, and mythology. Writing became the mechanism through which knowledge was no longer just spoken or passed through the generations verbally. It was now etched in clay, stone, and parchment, ready to survive the test of time. The Sumerians were the first to develop this crucial technology. Around 3,500 BCE, they began to use cuneiform writing to record everything from grain harvests to religious stories. This early form of writing began as a simple system for keeping track of goods. Farmers and merchants needed to record how much grain was harvested or traded. But before long, the Sumerians used it to write down laws, poetry, and the great epics that would later define their culture. Perhaps the most famous example of Sumerian writing is the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that has endured for millennia. This epic, one of the oldest known works of literature, tells the story of a king, Gilgamesh, who searches for immortality after the death of his friend Enkidu. The flood myth in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in which Utnapishtim survives a global flood, is one of the earliest recorded instances of what would become a ubiquitous cultural theme, a survival of humankind after a catastrophe. But it is more than just a myth. It is a legacy, a piece of knowledge preserved through writing, passed down from the Sumerians to future generations. Writing served as a tool to create historical records as well. The Sumerians used their system to record laws such as the Code of Warnemu, one of the earliest known legal codes. These laws were critical in maintaining order in an increasingly complex society. The written word transformed governance. Law codes were no longer simply oral traditions, but official, documented systems that could be upheld by future generations. The codification of laws marked the beginning of formal governance, and as the Sumerians codified their knowledge, they set the stage for societies across the globe to establish legal frameworks that would last through the ages. However, writing was not the only significant technological innovation born from the ashes of the Younger Dryas. The Sumerians also made great strides in agriculture, astronomy, and governance, each of which was deeply interconnected with their knowledge of the cosmos and the land they had come to control and cultivate. In agriculture, the Sumerians revolutionized food production with their irrigation systems. Using the water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, they built an elaborate system of canals, levees, and dikes to control the flow of water to their crops. This allowed them to grow cereal grains, such as barley, in quantities that were previously unimaginable. It also gave rise to the ability to store surplus food, which laid the foundation for permanent settlements and the rise of the city-state. But it wasn't just agriculture that the Sumerians excelled in. They were also pioneers in astronomy. The Sumerians were among the first to chart the stars, and their lunar calendar was used to regulate agriculture. They created complex celestial models based on their observations of the stars and planets, which were intertwined with their religious beliefs. The Sumerians believed that the movements of the stars were divine omens, and they tied their social and agricultural lives to the celestial bodies. This deep connection between astronomy and religion formed the backbone of Sumerian society, making the stars not just markers of time, but symbols of divine power and control over the forces of nature. In governance, the Sumerians developed systems of bureaucracy and administration that became models for future civilizations. City-states like Uruk, Ur, and Lagash were governed by priest-kings, rulers who were believed to have been chosen by the gods themselves. The rise of the priest-king, a figure who held both religious and political authority, can be seen as a direct response to the chaos and instability caused by the Younger Dryas. The priest-king was not just a ruler, but also a spiritual leader, a figure who represented both the divine will and the earthly authority required to restore order after a great catastrophe. But how did this knowledge survive? If the Younger Dryas caused such a drastic upheaval, how did humanity preserve what came before? The answer lies in the cultural memory embedded in the oral traditions of these early societies. Before writing, knowledge was passed down verbally, through songs, stories, and rituals. These oral traditions preserved the wisdom of earlier generations, even as new societies emerged from the ashes of older ones. The Sumerians, despite their advances, did not begin their cultural heritage from scratch. They inherited knowledge passed down through generations, knowledge that had survived the Younger Dryas, adapted, and evolved. This knowledge likely came from a time before the cataclysm, a time when human societies were more connected to the natural world and more in tune with the rhythms of the land and sky. In the wake of disaster, this knowledge was rediscovered, refined, and adapted to meet the challenges of a world that had changed irrevocably. Cultural myths, such as the Sumerian flood myth, are seen as encoded memories of a cataclysmic past. These stories, passed down through oral traditions, are not just tales, but reminders of the challenges faced by earlier generations and the resilience required to overcome them. As these societies rebuilt, they used these myths to form the foundation of their new societies, ensuring that the lessons of the past would never be forgotten. The process of oral transmission allowed for the preservation of practical knowledge, how to farm, how to survive, and how to organize societies. Over time, these traditions were formalized in the written word, first for administrative purposes, later for law, religion, and history. But in the beginning, these oral traditions were the key to preserving knowledge. They were the vehicles for the memory of ancient civilizations that had survived the cataclysmic events of the Younger Dryas and laid the groundwork for the birth of Sumer. Around 5000 BCE, in the lush, fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a profound transformation was taking place. The story of Sumer's birth is not one of gradual evolution, but rather a sudden emergence. A civilization that sprang into existence, almost as if from nowhere. What began as small farming villages blossomed into advanced city-states, laying the groundwork for human civilization as we know it. But how did this transformation happen? What catalyzed the rise of Sumer? The answers lie in a combination of cultural memory, technological innovation, and environmental adaptation. Sumer was the beginning of the urban revolution, where writing, architecture, and governance were born. The Sumerians emerged around 5000 BCE in the Fertile Crescent, a region blessed by abundant water sources from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The flooding of these rivers, predictable and dependable, brought both rich soils for agriculture and challenges to control the water for irrigation. This environmental challenge led to the rise of early urban settlements, the first city-states. While early settlements like Eridu and Uruk began as small agricultural villages, they rapidly grew in complexity due to the innovations spurred by the necessity of managing the resources in a fluctuating climate. By 3500 BCE, these settlements had transformed into sophisticated city-states. Ur, Lagash, Uruk, and others, each with their own rulers, laws, and identities. These city-states were the heart of early Sumerian civilization, and they had distinctive characteristics that made them more than just large villages. The key to their success lay in their ability to organize large-scale agricultural systems and produce a surplus of food. This surplus allowed people to specialize in non-farming activities like craftsmanship, trade, and administration, which in turn fueled the growth of the cities and the development of social stratification. With a growing population and complex needs came the necessity for organization, and that organization brought about innovations in technology and governance. Before Sumer emerged as the world's first urban civilization, the region was home to the Ubaid culture, which flourished from around 6500 BCE to 3800 BCE. The Ubaid culture was a precursor to Sumer, and it laid many of the foundations for what would come next. The Ubaid people were early settlers in the southern Mesopotamian marshlands, and they are credited with developing basic forms of irrigation, building mud brick houses, and creating pottery. However, the Ubaid culture was still primarily rural and agrarian, with small villages centered around family units. It wasn't until the transition to Sumer that these villages grew into city-states. This transformation was rapid and profound, marked by the emergence of new technologies and social structures. By 3500 BCE, the Sumerians had already developed complex urban infrastructure that included temples, administrative buildings, and residential areas that were organized into a city grid. During this time, the Ubaid culture's earlier developments in irrigation became more advanced. As the people of the region learned to control the flow of water, they were able to expand their agricultural output and support the growing urban populations. This technological leap allowed for the emergence of large-scale urban centers, which became the foundation for the later Sumerian civilization. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Sumerian emergence is how quickly the civilization advanced in areas like writing, architecture, and urban planning. A timeline of these advancements, from cuneiform writing to the construction of ziggurats and the creation of city grids, speaks to the extraordinary intellectual leap that the Sumerians made in a very short time. By around 3500 BCE, the Sumerians had developed cuneiform writing, the first known system of written language. Initially, cuneiform was created to keep track of agricultural products and manage trade, but over time, it expanded to include a wide range of uses, from legal codes and religious texts to poetry and epic tales, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. The invention of writing was not just a practical tool. It was a revolutionary leap in human communication. By using wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, the Sumerians were able to record information in a permanent form, preserving their history, laws, and cultural stories for future generations. This innovation fundamentally changed how societies interacted and maintained order, enabling Sumer to become the foundation of civilization as we know it. Equally significant was the development of ziggurats, massive stepped temples built to honor the gods. These monumental structures were more than just religious sites. They were symbolic representations of Sumerian society itself. The ziggurats were not just the homes of the gods. They were also centers of power, administration, and economic control. These awe-inspiring buildings, constructed from mud brick and sun-dried brick, symbolized the Sumerians' growing organizational capabilities and their reverence for the divine. The ziggurats were the focal points of the cities, towering above the rest of the urban landscape. The most famous ziggurat is the one at Ur, which still stands as a testament to Sumerian engineering and religious devotion. Built around 2100 BCE, the ziggurat at Ur had a massive central platform and a towering structure that allowed for priests to ascend closer to the heavens. This hierarchical view of the world, with the gods at the top and humanity below, reflected the Sumerians' belief in divine authority and the priest-king's role as a mediator between gods and people. Urban planning was another area in which the Sumerians excelled. The cities of Sumer were meticulously planned, with streets, walls, and districts organized for efficiency and defense. The Sumerians developed city grids, an innovative system that maximized space and allowed for efficient resource management. Each city-state had fortifications, and with the rise of social stratification, the poor were often confined to the outskirts, while the elite lived near the center, close to the ziggurat and other key structures. Additionally, the Sumerians were pioneers in waste management, establishing sewage systems to keep their cities clean and functional. These early systems of infrastructure were critical in supporting the dense populations of Sumer's growing urban centers. The transformation of agriculture during the Sumerian period represents one of the most profound and significant advancements in human history. Before the rise of the Sumerians, early humans had relied on hunting and gathering, living a nomadic lifestyle, constantly on the move, foraging for food, and following the migrations of wild animals. This lifestyle, while sustainable for thousands of years, was increasingly becoming unsustainable as populations grew and climates changed. It was during the post-Younger Dryas era, in the aftermath of one of the most catastrophic climatic events in Earth's history, that humanity transitioned from being scattered hunters and gatherers to building the foundation for civilization itself. After the global catastrophe of the Younger Dryas, humanity found itself in a world where the land was both scarred by climate change and yet, paradoxically, ripe for innovation. The Sumerians were the first to develop and refine agriculture at a scale that would eventually enable urbanization. But how did they achieve such a monumental shift? How did the Sumerians transform from nomadic survival to agricultural prosperity and urban civilization in just a few generations? At the heart of Sumer's agricultural revolution was the invention and refinement of irrigation. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which flowed through the heart of Sumer, had long been a natural source of water, flooding the surrounding lands during seasonal cycles. However, this unpredictable flooding was as much a challenge as it was an advantage. The key to Sumerian agricultural success was the ability to control and manage these floods. By developing complex systems of canals, ditches, and levees, the Sumerians turned the floodwaters to their advantage, transforming what could have been a disruptive force into a source of life. At first, the Sumerians dug simple ditches and channels to redirect water to their fields. But as populations grew and the need for more agricultural land increased, these systems became more sophisticated. Canals were dug to carry water across great distances, ensuring that fields near the rivers could be irrigated during the dry seasons. This allowed the Sumerians to cultivate crops year-round with consistent yields. The development of irrigation systems was not merely an improvement. It was a revolution, one that allowed for the surplus food production necessary to support growing cities. The technological expertise required to maintain these irrigation systems had deep implications for Sumerian society. With water management came social organization and the task of overseeing the canals, managing water distribution, and ensuring that all farmers had access to water led to the creation of the first administrative systems. Bureaucracy and record-keeping became essential. The Sumerians would eventually develop cuneiform writing to keep track of grain supplies, irrigation schedules, and taxes. This development marked the beginning of organized governance, which was central to the rise of the city-states of Sumer. With a reliable water source in place, the Sumerians were able to cultivate a wide range of crops. The three primary crops that became the backbone of Sumer's agricultural economy were wheat, barley, and flax. Wheat and barley were primarily grown for food, while flax was cultivated for its fibers, used in the production of textiles. These crops became the foundation of Sumerian society, providing sustenance, trade goods, and a stable food supply for their growing cities. The Sumerians did not limit themselves to just these three crops. Over time, they began to domesticate and cultivate other important plants, such as lentils, peas, and chickpeas, which provided crucial sources of protein. These additions expanded the range of their diet, increasing food security and enabling the sustenance of a larger population. The Sumerians were also among the first to engage in the practice of monoculture, growing large quantities of a single crop in a controlled area. This allowed them to grow vast fields of barley or wheat, which produced large surpluses that could be stored for future use or traded with neighboring regions. This practice, which became central to the functioning of Sumerian society, provided the foundation for their city-state economy. It was this ability to produce large amounts of food with a minimal workforce that allowed for specialization of labor and the emergence of complex urban societies. People no longer had to be focused solely on food production. They could become artisans, traders, priests, and scribes, all contributing to the development of a complex social structure. Alongside crop cultivation, the domestication of animals became another cornerstone of Sumerian society. The Sumerians domesticated a wide range of animals, including goats, sheep, and cattle, which provided them with meat, milk, and wool. Animal husbandry became increasingly important, as livestock not only supplied food, but also provided essential materials for clothing, tools, and trade. Sheep and goats, for example, were sheared for their wool, which was woven into clothing and other textiles, while cattle provided oxen that could be used to plow fields, allowing for more efficient agriculture. The Sumerians practiced advanced breeding techniques to ensure a stable and sustainable supply of livestock. This allowed them to improve their herd quality and ensure that their food and material needs were consistently met. Animals were kept in pens or stables within the cities, where they were well cared for and managed by specialized herders. This practice of managing livestock, along with the control of agricultural land, meant that Sumer's economy was not just based on crop cultivation. It was an integrated system that included animal products and agricultural surpluses, which were traded and exchanged within and outside the city-states. The animal products also played an important role in Sumerian religious practices. Cattle were often sacrificed in rituals dedicated to the gods, and the skins of animals were used to make ritual garments for priests. The Sumerians believed that the gods were deeply involved in their agricultural practices, and they performed rituals to ensure good harvests and protect their herds. The intertwining of agriculture, animal husbandry, and religion helped solidify the Sumerians' connection to the land and the divine forces that were believed to control it. As the Sumerians advanced in agriculture, their technological innovations soon followed. One of the most significant advancements of the Sumerians was the invention of the wheel, which was introduced around 3500 BCE. Initially, the wheel was used for pottery, allowing artisans to create uniform clay vessels that were essential for storing grain, liquids, and trade goods. However, the wheel soon found applications in transportation. The first wheeled vehicles emerged, transforming the way goods and people could move across long distances. Trade routes were established, and goods from Sumer were exchanged with distant lands, contributing to the rise of international trade. Alongside the wheel, the Sumerians also pioneered the development of writing. Cuneiform writing, which emerged around 3500 BCE, was initially used for practical purposes, recording the surplus of crops and tracking trade. However, it quickly evolved into a more sophisticated system used to record laws, religious texts, and historical narratives. The development of writing allowed the Sumerians to preserve their culture, legal systems, and stories, ensuring that their knowledge would not be lost. The Sumerians also made advances in metallurgy, particularly in the use of copper and bronze. By 3000 BCE, they were producing bronze tools, weapons, and jewelry by combining copper with tin. The introduction of bronze revolutionized the Sumerians' ability to create stronger, more durable tools, giving them a distinct advantage in warfare, agriculture, and craftsmanship. These early metallurgical techniques laid the groundwork for the Bronze Age and provided the Sumerians with the tools necessary to build and defend their cities. The Sumerians were not just farmers and inventors. They were also keen observers of the sky. Their knowledge of astronomy was deeply intertwined with their daily lives, influencing everything from their agricultural practices to their religious beliefs. By observing the moon, the Sumerians developed one of the earliest known lunar calendars, allowing them to predict the timing of the flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. This knowledge allowed them to plant their crops at precisely the right time, ensuring a successful harvest. Astronomy also played a significant role in Sumerian religion. The zodiac, which the Sumerians recognized, was tied to their belief that the heavens were controlled by the gods. They built ziggurats, massive step temples, that were aligned with celestial bodies to honor their gods. The study of the stars and planets was not just a practical tool for agriculture. It was a spiritual practice. The Sumerians believed that the movements of the stars were the will of the gods, and their lives were guided by celestial cycles. In recent years, archaeological discoveries have uncovered more about the Sumerians and their technological innovations. Excavations in Uruk, Ur, and other ancient Sumerian cities have provided crucial insights into the early use of writing and the development of administrative systems. Recent findings of cuneiform tablets show how Sumerians managed trade, recorded agricultural yields, and documented legal contracts. These tablets not only highlight the Sumerians' bureaucratic prowess, but also demonstrate how writing played an essential role in the everyday functioning of Sumerian society. The role of scribes in Sumerian society was indispensable. The discovery of early administrative records has revealed how scribes kept track of taxes, grain production, and even military supplies. These scribes were essential to maintaining order in the growing cities of Sumer. Their work laid the foundation for the legal and administrative systems that would govern these cities for centuries. Through recent discoveries, it is clear that the Sumerians were not just survivors of the Younger Dryas. They were innovators, using the knowledge they inherited and built upon to lay the foundations for the first urbanized civilization. In the aftermath of the Younger Dryas, a cataclysmic event that reshaped the planet, the survivors faced a world that was vastly different from the one they had known. The harsh climate changes, the loss of megafauna, and the disruption of ecosystems left humanity with the task of rebuilding not just their physical world, but also the very fabric of their society. As communities began to re-emerge and reorganize, they turned to a central and unifying force: religion. Religion, in many ways, became the cornerstone of social structure and governance, providing both stability and purpose in a world marked by instability and uncertainty. At the heart of this religious restructuring were the priest kings, a powerful class of rulers who combined political power with spiritual authority. These leaders were not just secular rulers, but divine representatives, believed to be chosen by the gods to guide and protect their people. In Sumer, the emergence of the priest king was the foundation for a new kind of governance, one where religion was not just an aspect of society, but its driving force. The priest kings ruled over their city-states, dictating both earthly and spiritual matters, a duality that made their power absolute. The role of religion in Sumerian society was not confined to personal belief, but was embedded in the very structure of governance, ensuring that the gods were seen as the ultimate authority in every aspect of life. The first signs of this integration between religion and governance can be seen in the construction of ziggurats, massive stepped temples that towered over the Sumerian cities. These monumental structures were more than just places of worship. They were also centers of political and economic power. The ziggurats were dedicated to the gods, but they also served as the seat of power for the priest kings who ruled the surrounding territories. The priest king's dual role as both a religious leader and political ruler was essential in maintaining order in the aftermath of the Younger Dryas. The people, traumatized by the cataclysmic event, sought a strong figure who could guide them through the chaos and bring stability. The priest king embodied both the divine will of the gods and the earthly power needed to govern effectively. This structure was especially effective in Sumer, where the cities of Uruk, Ur, and Lagash were among the first to embrace this system. The priest kings became the mediators between humanity and the gods, and their rule was legitimized by their divine connection. The divine mandate of the priest king was seen as crucial to the survival of the city-state. In the Sumerian worldview, the gods were not distant, abstract beings, but were deeply involved in every aspect of life. The priest kings were seen as the chosen ones, the ones tasked with ensuring that the will of the gods was enacted in the material world. This connection to the divine provided stability to a society that had seen the world nearly collapse. The priest kings would lead the people in rituals, sacrifices, and offerings to ensure that the gods remained pleased and that their blessings continued to flow. The power of the priest king was reflected in the temples they built. These temples were not just places of worship, but were the center of all political and economic activity. The temple was the heart of the city, where decisions about land, resources, and even laws were made. The priest king's role as both spiritual leader and ruler of the city-state meant that he had the power to control both the people's spiritual life and their daily existence. One of the most striking features of Sumerian cities was the ziggurats, massive stepped temples that dominated the urban landscape. The ziggurats were not only religious symbols, representing the mountainous homes of the gods, but they were also practical structures used to consolidate power and maintain order. Each city-state in Sumer had its own ziggurat, often dedicated to the city's patron deity. These ziggurats were multifunctional, serving as temples, administrative centers, and even as the palaces for the priest kings. The ziggurats were designed to connect the heavens and the earth, with their towering structures reaching toward the sky. The people believed that the gods resided in the heavens, and the ziggurat was the structure that allowed the priest kings to communicate with them. The higher the ziggurat, the closer it brought the priest king to the gods. The temple at the top of the ziggurat was the spiritual center of the city, where religious rituals and ceremonies were held. But it was also where the priest king would go to make decisions that affected the entire community, both spiritually and materially. The ziggurats were also administrative hubs, central to the functioning of the early Sumerian bureaucratic systems. This dual purpose of the ziggurats, religious and administrative, was crucial for maintaining the stability of the early Sumerian cities. The priest kings used the ziggurats to house scribes, accountants, and other officials who worked to organize the city-state's economy. Cuneiform tablets were often stored in these temples, documenting everything from agricultural surpluses to trade transactions, ensuring that the city-state ran smoothly. The ziggurat wasn't just a religious center. It was the epicenter of governance. In the aftermath of the Younger Dryas, the survivors were left to rebuild not only their cities, but their belief systems. Religion became a means of coping with the trauma and uncertainty of the new world, and the Sumerians crafted religious narratives that helped them make sense of the destruction they had endured. The flood myths that appeared in Sumerian literature, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, reflect the trauma and collective memory of a world-altering catastrophe. These myths portrayed the gods as powerful and sometimes wrathful beings, but also as protectors of humanity. The Sumerians believed that the flood had been sent by the gods to cleanse the earth of human wickedness. But within the mythology, there was also a message of hope and rebirth. After the floodwaters receded, the world was reborn, and the survivors were tasked with rebuilding their society under the guidance of the gods. This narrative mirrored the real-world process of rebuilding after the Younger Dryas, with religion providing the framework for social cohesion and cultural identity. Religion, with its emphasis on cosmic order, became the means by which the Sumerians maintained social stability. By integrating religion into the governance structure, the Sumerians ensured that their leaders, the priest kings, would have both political power and divine authority, creating a sense of legitimacy and order in the rebuilding process. The priest kings were seen not only as rulers, but as mediators between the gods and the people, responsible for ensuring the will of the gods was carried out in every aspect of society. Through rituals, sacrifices, and the construction of ziggurats, they reaffirmed their role as the link between the divine and the earthly realm. In Sumer, the priest kings held the key to preserving and disseminating knowledge. The priesthood was responsible for maintaining written records of laws, rituals, and administrative matters, and these records were often kept in the temples, which acted as libraries and centers of learning. The priest kings were not just political rulers, but also the custodians of knowledge. They oversaw the training of scribes, who were responsible for recording the day-to-day activities of the city, ensuring that the knowledge of past generations would be preserved for the future. The priest king's role in preserving knowledge was also spiritual. In a world still recovering from the trauma of the Younger Dryas, the priest kings played a vital role in ensuring that religious knowledge and mythology were passed down through oral traditions and written texts. These myths provided a way for the Sumerians to remember their past, understand their place in the world, and navigate the challenges of rebuilding society. The priest kings, through their leadership and religious influence, ensured that the wisdom of the gods would guide the Sumerians into the future. In essence, the priest kings were more than rulers. They were the guardians of the collective memory, using religion and ritual to bind their people together in the face of the unknown. They gave order to a society born out of chaos, and their divine mandate allowed them to lead their people through the rebuilding of a world forever, marked by the scars of a cataclysmic past. The rise of Sumer as the first true civilization was not an isolated event. While Sumer was bustling with the innovation of agriculture, the birth of cities, and the development of writing, something remarkable was happening across the globe. In faraway lands, civilizations were rising almost simultaneously. Ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley Civilization, and Mesoamerican cultures began to emerge as well, each independently creating their own systems of government, religion, and social structure. But when we take a closer look, there are unmistakable parallels that suggest these cultures were not as isolated as we once thought. From shared mythologies to aligned astronomical systems, there's a profound mystery in the way these civilizations, separated by vast distances, seem to have mirrored each other. The timing of the rise of Sumer and other great civilizations is nothing short of fascinating. Around 3500 BCE, the first city-states of Sumer were emerging in Mesopotamia. But by 3100 BCE, Egypt was establishing its own urban centers along the Nile River. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan Civilization, was developing in the Indus River Valley in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India. Simultaneously, in the Americas, civilizations such as the Olmec were beginning to establish their roots in Mesoamerica, around 1500 BCE. Each of these regions experienced a dramatic transformation, from scattered farming communities to advanced urban civilizations. The Egyptians built their great pyramids and began writing in hieroglyphs, while the Indus Valley people developed their own unique script and urban planning systems. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec culture began to shape art, architecture, and social structure in ways that would lay the foundation for civilizations such as the Maya and Aztec. But what ties these civilizations together? Were they truly independent developments, or were there influences at work that we haven't fully understood yet? As we dive deeper into these civilizations, one thing becomes strikingly clear. They shared certain mythological motifs, astronomical alignments, and even religious themes. These commonalities suggest that the people of Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica may have had a shared cultural heritage or been exposed to similar ideas, either through direct contact or cultural diffusion. For example, many of these civilizations feature flood myths. Sumerian mythology tells the story of Ziusuda, who survives a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Similarly, in Egyptian mythology, the flood of the Nile River is seen as both a destructive and renewing force, essential for life and rebirth. The biblical story of Noah's Ark shares similar themes, and the Hindu tradition of Manu recounts a great flood that wipes out the world. These flood myths, which appear in nearly every ancient culture, are perhaps cultural memories of a cataclysmic event, potentially related to the climate shifts of the Younger Dryas. There are also shared religious symbols across these civilizations. The use of the sun, the moon, and the stars as divine symbols is universal. In Sumer, the sun god Utu was associated with justice, while in Egypt, Ra, the sun god, was the most important deity in the pantheon. The Indus Valley also seems to have placed great importance on celestial bodies, as evidenced by their alignment of cities with celestial events. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec civilizations both held the sun as central to their religious beliefs and saw eclipses as important omens. Moreover, the existence of ziggurats in Sumer, pyramids in Egypt, and later the Mesoamerican pyramids suggests a shared architectural knowledge focused on creating monumental structures dedicated to the gods. The ziggurats of Sumer were aligned with celestial events, and the Egyptian pyramids were designed with the same care, intended to ensure that the pharaohs could ascend to the heavens. In Mesoamerica, the pyramids of Teotihuacan and the Maya temples shared similar symbolic purposes, aligning with the stars and marking significant celestial events. This evidence of shared religious motifs and architectural practices raises the question: were these civilizations connected through some form of cultural exchange, or were these similarities the result of parallel developments, driven by the same human need for structure, belief, and understanding of the universe? One of the most intriguing theories suggests that there may have been direct contact between these civilizations, either through maritime trade routes or migrations. While the ancient world was separated by vast distances, there is evidence that long-distance trade networks existed much earlier than previously believed. Maritime trade routes may have connected the Mesopotamian city-states with the ancient Egyptians and perhaps even the Indus Valley. The Persian Gulf, which connected Sumer to the wider world, could have served as a gateway for trade and cultural exchange, bringing new ideas, technologies, and religious beliefs from the Indus Valley to Sumer and beyond. Archaeological discoveries suggest that Mesopotamians may have traded with the Harappans via the Persian Gulf and into the Indus River Valley, exchanging goods such as lapis lazuli and copper. Additionally, maritime trade routes between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea might have allowed Egyptians to trade with Sumerians and Indus Valley people, while the Minoans, living on the island of Crete, played an intermediary role. These maritime routes could have provided a conduit for the spread of technological knowledge, including writing systems, agriculture, and astronomy, as well as shared mythologies and religious symbols. The idea of migration is also compelling. Could people from one civilization have migrated to another, bringing with them their knowledge of agriculture, architectural practices, and religion? It is possible that survivors of earlier civilizations that had been wiped out by the Younger Dryas or other catastrophic events migrated to these more stable areas, passing on their knowledge to the emerging civilizations. This would explain the similarities between distant cultures that had no known direct contact. Evidence of early maritime activity in places such as the Aegean, the Indus Valley, and the Persian Gulf suggests that people were traveling great distances long before the advent of what we consider the age of exploration. There is archaeological evidence of seafaring expeditions across the Mediterranean and into the Red Sea, indicating that ancient civilizations had already begun to establish long-distance trade routes that would facilitate the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. In addition to trade, migrations also played a crucial role in the transmission of knowledge. As people moved from one area to another, they carried with them their understanding of the world, their agricultural knowledge, astronomical systems, and religious beliefs. The movement of people, driven by climate shifts, warfare, or trade, created the perfect opportunity for knowledge to spread across vast distances. Could these shared symbols, architectural practices, and religious motifs be the result of an early globalization that occurred much earlier than we previously thought? The evidence suggests that there was more interaction between ancient civilizations than we have traditionally believed. The story of ancient civilizations is one that fascinates us all, but the way that story is told is often deeply shaped by the perspectives and prejudices of those telling it. The field of archaeology has long been dominated by a particular set of academic frameworks, perspectives that guide how we understand the past. Yet, as our understanding of history continues to evolve, so too do the questions about what we know, and perhaps more importantly, what we don't know. At the heart of this ongoing debate is the clash between mainstream archaeology and the more alternative theories put forward by researchers like Graham Hancock and others who challenge the established narrative. Hancock's theories on lost civilizations have provoked both fascination and skepticism, drawing a line in the sand between traditional academic archaeologists and those who believe that human history is far older, more complex, and filled with mysteries yet to be fully understood. Mainstream archaeology, which has largely relied on the study of excavated evidence, dates human civilization to around 5000 BCE, with the emergence of Sumer, Egypt, and the Indus Valley. This view holds that human societies gradually evolved from hunter-gatherers into more complex systems of governance and cultural practices over millennia. The tools, artifacts, and ruins that scholars have discovered provide a linear narrative of civilization, with its beginnings rooted in agricultural advancements, the rise of cities, and the creation of writing. However, Graham Hancock, a prominent alternative archaeologist and author of Fingerprints of the Gods, has presented a challenging hypothesis that an ancient, advanced civilization existed long before Sumer, Egypt, or even the Indus Valley. According to Hancock, this lost civilization existed at least 12,000 years ago, and its memory is encoded in myths, flood stories, and archaeological anomalies found across the globe. Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey, is often cited by Hancock and his followers as evidence of an advanced society that existed well before what mainstream archaeology considers to be the dawn of civilization. Hancock's theory hinges on the idea that global cataclysmic events, such as the end of the Ice Age, caused the downfall of this advanced civilization, and that the survivors of this catastrophe then rebuilt human civilization from the ground up, rediscovering and rebuilding the knowledge and technologies that were lost. Mainstream archaeologists, however, are quick to dismiss these theories, arguing that no solid evidence exists to support the idea of a pre-Ice Age advanced civilization. Instead, they contend that human civilization, as we know it, developed organically over time, emerging as a result of long-term gradual processes rather than a sudden leap. They point out the lack of direct evidence, such as advanced artifacts or technology, to support the claim of an ancient civilization before the well-established rise of Sumer. Critics also argue that Hancock's reliance on myths and alternative interpretations of evidence does not constitute a solid scientific foundation for his theories. One of the more intriguing and controversial ideas related to the alternative archaeology debate is the Silurian hypothesis, put forward by Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt in 2018. The hypothesis explores a breathtaking idea. Could there have been advanced industrial civilizations on Earth long before the rise of humanity? What if human civilization was not the first to master technology, but rather the latest in a series of intelligent species that once dominated the planet? According to the Silurian hypothesis, it is possible that advanced civilizations may have existed millions of years ago, long before humans came onto the scene. Frank and Schmidt proposed that industrial civilizations could have arisen and disappeared multiple times throughout Earth's history, and that the evidence of their existence could be buried deep within the Earth's geological strata, beyond our ability to detect with conventional archaeological methods. The hypothesis suggests that the geological record may contain the imprints of past civilizations that existed long before us, but that these civilizations were ultimately wiped out by catastrophic events such as asteroid impacts, climate shifts, or volcanic supereruptions, leaving only trace evidence of their existence. This idea challenges the prevailing view that human civilization is a singular, linear phenomenon, unprecedented in the history of Earth. It opens up the possibility that intelligent life could have existed on Earth before humans, and that these civilizations may have even achieved technological advancements comparable to, or even more advanced than those of today. If this hypothesis is true, it would mean that we are part of a much larger and more complex history of civilization than we ever imagined. However, the Silurian hypothesis is highly speculative and does not have direct evidence to support it. Frank and Schmidt suggest that there might be no physical remnants of these hypothetical civilizations, as cataclysmic events could have completely erased any trace of them. But they also propose that there could be subtle clues in the geological record, such as strange chemical signatures or unusual isotopic traces, that could point to the existence of a past industrial civilization. The debates between mainstream archaeology and alternative archaeology are far from settled. On one side, traditional scholars argue that alternative theories lack the rigor, consistency, and verifiable evidence required for serious scientific consideration. They maintain that the slow, gradual development of human society and culture is well documented in the archaeological record, and that new theories must fit within the framework of existing knowledge, which has been accumulated over centuries of research. On the other side, proponents of alternative theories like Hancock and Frank and Schmidt argue that the current scientific paradigm is too narrow and that it dismisses important evidence in favor of established and conservative interpretations. They point to the many gaps in the historical and archaeological records and suggest that these gaps could be filled with new, innovative approaches to understanding the past. The existence of out-of-place artifacts, such as the Antikythera mechanism, or Göbekli Tepe, and the enduring presence of mythological patterns across cultures, all point to the possibility of lost knowledge that might not fit neatly into mainstream theories. Critics also raise concerns about pseudo-archaeology, use of unverified claims, and unscientific methods to support outlandish theories. While alternative theories often raise compelling questions and spark public interest, they can also lead to misinterpretations of archaeological findings and distract from genuine research. Some argue that focusing too much on theories of ancient civilizations can undermine credible scholarship, diverting attention away from more pressing issues in the field. While mainstream archaeology may remain skeptical of alternative theories, the debate itself has sparked an important conversation about the nature of knowledge and the limits of what we currently understand. It challenges us to ask not just what happened in the past, but also how we come to know it. Can we be sure that everything we consider historical fact is truly accurate? Or might we be overlooking evidence that could rewrite our understanding of the past? The possibility that advanced civilizations could have risen and fallen long before the Sumerians, and that their knowledge might still be hidden beneath the layers of earth, forces us to reconsider how history is recorded and preserved. The mysteries of our past are far from solved, and whether or not we accept alternative theories, the conversation they spark about human resilience, innovation, and survival is one that is worth continuing. In the end, the debate between mainstream and alternative archaeology is not just about evidence, it's about curiosity, imagination, and the quest for truth. It reminds us that our understanding of the past is always in flux, shaped by the knowledge we have today, and that new discoveries, be they scientific, archaeological, or theoretical, could change our entire perception of human history. In Sumerian mythology, the Apkallu were revered as the wise men of ancient time sages or semi-divine beings who were believed to have brought civilization's most essential knowledge to humanity. The Apkallu were said to be the teachers and advisors to the first kings and gods. Their stories are often intertwined with themes of survival and rebirth, suggesting that they were not only mythological figures, but possibly reflections of real individuals who were crucial in the process of civilization's reemergence after a great cataclysm. According to Sumerian lore, the Apkallu were part of a group of 7 sages who were sent by the god Enki to teach humanity the arts of civilization. These figures were often described as possessing vast knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, architecture, and law, the cornerstones of early Sumerian society. They were said to have preserved ancient wisdom and acted as guides for humanity's transition from a tribal or nomadic existence to an organized, city-based society. But the Apkallu were not just symbols of knowledge. In many versions of the myths, the Apkallu also seem to embody the idea of survival after a great flood or disaster. They were preservers of the ancient knowledge, said to have emerged from a world devastated by a cataclysm, similar to the great flood stories in other cultures. The Apkallu's association with survival and the preservation of sacred wisdom suggests that they may have been connected to the rebuilding of civilization after the Younger Dryas or another global catastrophe. These figures in mythology could be symbolic representations of real individuals or groups who survived the cataclysm and helped rebuild society, using the ancient knowledge they had managed to preserve. The Apkallu's connection to advanced knowledge hints at a much older, possibly pre-cataclysmic culture that had achieved a high level of technological and spiritual advancement, and whose knowledge was passed down through the survivors and later generations. One of the most fascinating artifacts that points to the possibility of lost advanced civilizations is the Antikythera mechanism. discovered in 1901 off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera. This ancient device is widely considered to be the world's first analog computer. It dates back to approximately 100 BCE, but its complexity and precision were so advanced for its time that it has baffled scholars for over a century. The Antikythera mechanism was made up of a series of bronze gears and was likely used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses with astounding accuracy. It could calculate the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, and even track the cycles of the Olympic Games. The knowledge required to create such a device suggests that the civilization that built it had an extraordinary understanding of mechanical engineering, mathematics, and astronomy well beyond what was thought to have been possible in the ancient world. But the Antikythera mechanism isn't the only artifact that points to the existence of a lost civilization with advanced technology. There are other out-of-place artifacts, often referred to as opuparts, that suggest ancient peoples possessed knowledge that should not have been possible for their time. These artifacts include things like ancient batteries, delicate machinery, and even intricate stone carvings that seem to depict technologies not seen in the ancient world. Consider the dendrolite in Egypt, a carving on the wall of the Temple of Hathor at Dendra. The image shows a figure holding what seems to resemble an electrical bulb, as well as a large coil suggesting that ancient Egyptians might have had access to a form of electrical power. Some have even proposed that the dendrolite represents an advanced energy system, which, if true, would rewrite our understanding of the technology available to ancient civilizations. Then there is the Nazca lines in Peru, giant geoglyphs etched into the desert floor that can only be fully appreciated from the air. These massive designs raise questions about how such immense and complex artwork was created without the aid of modern technology. Some believe these lines were designed as a form of astronomical calendar, or perhaps even a communication system for ancient civilizations with far-reaching knowledge of the cosmos. Another intriguing artifact is the Piri Reis map, a world map created by the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis in 1513. What makes this map so fascinating is that it includes accurate depictions of the Antarctic coastline, a landmass that was not discovered until much later. The map's details suggest that ancient navigators may have had advanced geographical knowledge that modern explorers did not acquire until centuries later. These oparts and the Antikythera mechanism point to the possibility that there were advanced civilizations long before Sumer, Egypt, or any other historically recognized ancient societies. They suggest that either the technology of these lost cultures was far ahead of its time, or that the knowledge passed down from these earlier cultures was either lost or buried under layers of time, cataclysms, and natural disasters. The role of knowledge transmission and preservation in the context of ancient civilizations is absolutely critical. From the Apkallu in Sumerian mythology to the survival of advanced technological knowledge through out-of-place artifacts, the theme that runs through history is that human knowledge is not easily destroyed. Even in the wake of global catastrophes and mass extinctions, there is evidence to suggest that survivors had access to knowledge, whether through oral traditions, written records, or surviving technological remnants that allowed them to rebuild and progress. This knowledge wasn't always preserved in traditional ways. It didn't always survive in the forms that we recognize today: books, monuments, or cities. Instead, it survived in myths, rituals, artifacts, and oral stories passed down through generations. Much of what we know of our ancient past is embedded in the myths and legends that were created to preserve that knowledge. The Apkallu, for example, may have been based on real figures who were the carriers of knowledge following a great cataclysm, passed down through the stories of the Sumerians. As we look at these ancient artifacts, the Antikythera mechanism, the dendrolite, the Nazca lines, and the Piri Reis map, we're reminded that knowledge can be passed through time in unexpected ways. It's not just about physical artifacts. It's also about the ideas and beliefs that survive through the ages. often in ways we don't immediately recognize. Perhaps just as the Apkallu carried the knowledge of the gods, we too are the inheritors of a far deeper and more ancient wisdom than we might imagine. Whether through advanced technology, mythological narratives, or rituals, the knowledge that survived past cataclysmic events may be the key to understanding how ancient civilizations not only survived, but thrived after some of history's greatest challenges. And as we uncover more artifacts, as we delve deeper into the mysteries of the past, we may find that the wisdom of the ancients is not lost. It is waiting to be rediscovered. In the aftermath of a cataclysmic event like the Younger Dryas, humanity was left to piece together the shattered fragments of its world. As entire ecosystems were disrupted, megafauna disappeared, and entire regions became inhospitable, the survivors faced the monumental task of not just surviving, but of rebuilding society itself. The question that emerges is how these early civilizations managed to restart and rise from the ashes of destruction. What did they learn from the past, and how did they safeguard their knowledge to ensure future generations would not repeat the same mistakes? In his groundbreaking work, Lewis Dartnell, a prominent author and scientist, offers a compelling blueprint for how civilizations can rise from the ashes of a cataclysmic event. Dartnell's focus is on technological salvage, the idea that surviving groups would have to begin by gathering and preserving the knowledge necessary for civilization to thrive once again. But this would not be easy. The global catastrophe would leave societies scattered, and much of the knowledge accumulated over thousands of years would be lost. The challenge then becomes not just to survive, but to rediscover and adapt the knowledge that would allow humanity to rebuild on a grand scale. Dartnell's concept of civilization restart is built around the idea that after a cataclysm, the first survivors must focus on rebuilding basic technologies. These would include things like tools and agriculture, but they must also consider how to preserve their knowledge so it can be passed down through generations. Dartnell suggests that if we were to lose much of our modern technology and infrastructure, we would need to begin by salvaging what is left. This would include gathering basic materials, copper, tin, iron, and learning how to smelt and forge metals again. But more than just material resources, there would need to be a methodology for passing down critical knowledge that could be used in the future to advance civilization once again. The preservation of knowledge in durable forms like writing, artifacts, and technological blueprints would be paramount. Dartnell stresses the importance of encoding key information in resilient formats, especially writing, which has been the backbone of knowledge transmission for millennia. Early civilizations like Sumer understood the importance of recording their achievements, laws, and stories. Their invention of cuneiform writing was not just about keeping records. It was about preserving the cultural memory and the knowledge required for future generations to rebuild. One of the most significant aspects of Dartnell's theory is the importance of resilient infrastructure. Survivors of a cataclysm would need to focus on rebuilding their societies by focusing on technologies and practices that could withstand time. This would mean building durable structures that could survive future disasters and weathering. The knowledge of agriculture, irrigation, and metalworking would be critical to the early stages of the rebuild. The Sumerians understood this concept well. After the devastation of the Younger Dryas, as they began to rebuild their societies, they turned to writing as a way to preserve not just economic transactions, but the very wisdom and knowledge they had inherited. Cuneiform writing emerged as one of the earliest tools to document and store important information, from trade records to religious practices to legal codes. One of the first examples of knowledge preservation in Sumer was the Code of Ur-Nammu, which is considered one of the earliest known law codes in history. By writing down these laws, the Sumerians ensured that future generations would have access to the rules that govern society, keeping order and structure alive long after the events that brought them to the brink of collapse. They encoded their laws in stone, creating monuments that would survive time and disaster. The ziggurats, monumental temples dedicated to the gods, were not just places of worship, but also symbols of resilience and endurance. They were built with great care and designed to outlast time, with their stone structures standing as testaments to the Sumerian determination to not only rebuild, but to preserve their culture. These ziggurats became administrative hubs, where religious and political leaders could gather to discuss matters of governance, ensuring that knowledge could be passed down to the next generations, secured in both writing and stone. Monumental architecture played an important role in ensuring the survival of knowledge. These grand structures stood as physical representations of cultural continuity and the resilience of the human spirit. They served as places where knowledge was transmitted, not just from one generation to the next, but also across the ages, helping to keep the flame of civilization alive even after cataclysmic events. As we look at the Sumerian approach to rebuilding and knowledge preservation, we can draw parallels to the challenges that modern societies face today. While we are not facing a global catastrophe like the Younger Dryas, we do face other significant challenges, including climate change, resource depletion, and the rise of new global crises that threaten our very existence. The lessons from Sumer about survival, knowledge transmission, and agriculture are more relevant than ever. Sumer's use of agriculture to rebuild civilization after the Younger Dryas offers insights into how we might ensure food security in the face of climate shifts. The Sumerians developed irrigation systems that turned barren landscapes into fertile fields, allowing them to feed a growing population. Their innovation in water management was crucial to their survival and prosperity. And today, with the challenges posed by climate change and the need for sustainable agriculture, there is much we can learn from their example. Modern societies could benefit from Sumerian principles by reinvesting in sustainable agricultural practices, particularly those that emphasize water conservation and soil fertility. Moreover, the Sumerian commitment to writing as a means of preserving knowledge offers a crucial lesson for today's world. In a rapidly changing world, where information is created faster than it can be processed, it's essential that we find ways to record and preserve critical knowledge, whether in the form of scientific advancements, cultural heritage, or climate data. Just as the Sumerians encoded their laws and knowledge into cuneiform tablets, modern societies can ensure that future generations inherit the knowledge necessary to navigate an uncertain future. Finally, the Sumerian model of governance, where priest-kings combine spiritual and political power, offers lessons in leadership and resilience. In a post-cataclysmic world, effective leadership is essential for rebuilding. The priest-kings of Sumer were tasked with not just governing their people, but with ensuring their spiritual and material survival. In modern societies, we need leaders who can navigate crises, foster cooperation, and ensure that the needs of the people are met through innovative solutions and collaborative governance. The Sumerians didn't just survive the end of an age, they thrived. And as we face our own challenges, we can look back to their example for guidance. The preservation of knowledge, the advancements in agriculture, and the resilience of Sumer offer timeless lessons that will serve us well as we confront the uncertainties of the future. Human history is a story marked by periods of extraordinary resilience and, at times, catastrophic collapse. As we look to the past, we notice an alarming pattern. Throughout our history, there have been cataclysmic resets times when civilizations were shattered by natural disasters, climate shifts, or cosmic events. And while we cannot predict the future with certainty, there are signs that humanity might face such challenges once again. The key question is, how prepared are we? Can we learn from the past, from the disasters that nearly wiped us out, and build a future more resilient than the civilizations before us? The Sumerians, after all, did not only survive a cataclysm, they emerged from it and laid the foundation for one of the most influential civilizations in history. As we stand at the precipice of the 21st century, we find ourselves facing our own global challenges. From climate change to resource depletion, the question of resilience looms larger than ever. In the study of ancient civilizations, there is a concept known as geomagnetic excursions, sudden disruptions in Earth's magnetic field that have occurred throughout history. These excursions, sometimes referred to as pole reversals or geomagnetic storms, are not just theoretical risks. They have been a part of our planet's geological history. While we have no records of ancient peoples fully understanding these events, the physical evidence of their occurrence is written in the layers of rock, sediment, and ice that our planet bears. For instance, one of the most significant geomagnetic events in the last 3,000 years was the Sterno-Etruria excursion, which is thought to have contributed to disruptions in both climate and society in regions such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. These geomagnetic shifts might not have caused a global cataclysm in the traditional sense, like asteroid impacts or massive volcanic eruptions, but they were likely responsible for sharp climate changes, disruptions to agriculture, and food shortages, all of which could have severely impacted societies. In some cases, civilizations may have been forced to migrate or reorganize in response to environmental stress caused by these shifts. It's important to note that geomagnetic excursions often coincide with global cooling periods, as they can disrupt Earth's ability to retain heat or influence solar radiation reaching the surface. While today's technology is far more advanced than anything the ancients had, we are still vulnerable to the possibility of geomagnetic storms. In 2025, scientists raised alarms about the potential impact of large geomagnetic storms on modern satellite technology and global communication systems. While our world is more interconnected than ever, that same interconnectedness could be its Achilles heel. A powerful geomagnetic storm could disrupt power grids, communication networks, and transportation systems, creating chaos on a global scale. Yet, much like the ancient societies that survived their own challenges, we have the capacity to build resilience and safeguard knowledge for future generations. In many ways, the world today faces challenges that are not dissimilar to those faced by ancient civilizations, especially in the wake of a global cataclysm. The effects of climate change, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and disruptions to ecosystems are already apparent and could worsen if left unaddressed. Scientists have warned of unprecedented climate events over the next century, with the potential to displace millions of people and disrupt global food supplies. Just as the Younger Dryas was a time of rapid cooling, we are now entering a period marked by accelerated warming. Coupled with the climate crisis are the concerns surrounding resource depletion, from fossil fuels to fresh water, which are being consumed at unsustainable rates. This issue is compounded by growing populations, putting additional pressure on already strained resources. Global health crises such as pandemics, alongside political instability, have further exposed the fragility of our systems. Yet, despite these overwhelming challenges, there is also a remarkable resilience within humanity. Just as the Sumerians rebuilt after the Younger Dryas, modern society has already demonstrated the capacity for recovery in the face of global threats. The response to the COVID-19 pandemic showcased the ability of governments, industries, and individuals to adapt to catastrophic situations, though it also illuminated the weaknesses in our systems that still need attention. As we look ahead, we face choices about how to prepare for the next global reset, whether caused by climate change, pandemics, or other cataclysmic events. The question that looms over us is not whether a reset is coming, but rather how we will respond. Despite the seeming fragility of our current systems, humanity has an amazing capacity for resilience. The key to this resilience, however, is the preservation of knowledge. Just as the Sumerians preserved their knowledge through the creation of cuneiform, writing, and monumental architectural works, modern societies must find ways to preserve the crucial knowledge needed to survive and rebuild after a catastrophe. One of the most enduring lessons from the ancient world is the importance of encoding knowledge in durable formats. The Sumerians encoded their laws, trade transactions, and cultural wisdom in stone and clay, creating a lasting record of their civilization. Today, we have the tools to preserve knowledge in digital formats, but those formats are vulnerable to technological failures and data corruption. To build a resilient future, we must create systems for knowledge preservation that can withstand time and catastrophic events. We must also draw inspiration from the way that ancient cultures preserved their oral traditions, rituals, and spiritual beliefs. The storytelling passed down through generations provided a framework for societies to understand their identity and their place in the universe, even in the face of great challenges. The stories of survival, whether the flood myths of the Sumerians, the teachings of the Apkallu, or the stories of divine intervention, served as beacons of hope for future generations. These myths were not just cautionary tales. They were expressions of humanity's ability to rebuild after catastrophe, to recover from the ashes, and create something new and lasting. As we move further into the 21st century, we must take these lessons to heart. Humanity will undoubtedly face new challenges: climatic, technological, and social, but the survival of our civilization will depend on our ability to adapt, innovate, and preserve knowledge. The systems we create today, whether in agriculture, technology, governance, or global cooperation, will be the foundation for tomorrow's survivors. If history has taught us anything, it's that humanity is resilient. No matter the reset, the survivors will rebuild, armed with the knowledge that has been passed down through generations, and, perhaps most importantly, with a renewed understanding of the delicate balance between civilization and nature. As we look ahead, we must consider not just what we know, but how we choose to preserve and share that knowledge. The story of the Sumerians teaches us that societies that endure are those that learn from the past while also adapting to the challenges of the present. The next great cataclysm may be unpredictable, but how we prepare for it, the knowledge we store, the connections we build, and the resilience we cultivate will determine how we rise from the ashes once again. Just as the ancient civilizations of Sumer and Egypt rebuilt after their respective cataclysms, so too can we. We must ensure that the lessons of the past are never lost, and that we stand ready for whatever challenges the future may bring.